It's time to get all set for Sunday, a podcast for busy and distracted Catholics with your hosts, Scott Williams and Jeff Traylor.
When I hear the coffee brewing, I think, what the heck we doing? Because I got barely any sleep last night. As the diaper bag I pack with Hot Wheels dollies and some snacks, I say a prayer there'll be a seat in the crime room this time. It's alright, cause I'm all set for Sunday. It's alright, cause I'm all set for. It's alright, cause I'm all set for. It's alright, cause I'm all set for Sunday.
Welcome to All Set for Sunday, a podcast for busy and distracted Catholics to be a little more prepared for Sunday Mass. My name is Scott Williams. My co-host is Jeff Traylor. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Scott.
You're having a whale of a good time over there.
A whale, yes, I am. I have whales on my shirt, for those who can't see.
And we have a new guest today.
We do.
I'll let you introduce your own pastor.
It's been a while since we had a brand new guest who didn't force his way into the podcast like Father McCarthy when he
abruptly showed up.
when he live Zoom bombed us during a podcast. But we are joined by an elusive guest, I would say. I think we're about 3 years we've been trying to get this person to join us. But Father Eric Johnson, my own pastor and good friend, and almost makes it two for three in priests from my wedding who have been on the podcast now. So
Great.
yeah.
Father
Who's the
Steve
third?
Giannini was the other one, right?
Yes. I don't know if he'd say yes, but who knows? We'll try.
You just got to ask for 3 years, and then
Yeah.
they come.
There you go.
No, Father Eric, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, we're excited to have you here. Obviously, part of your time here. Well, we can talk about it, but you spent, as you just said here a minute ago, half of your time, your priestly years, working in the Catholic Center.
Yes.
In different roles, right? Director of Vocations, Vicar for Clergy. What other roles have you had in there?
That was it.
That was it. But 2 long stints in those 2
Yes.
roles.
Yes.
But now back to the nitty gritty, boots on the ground as a pastor in the Archdiocese. How are things settling in for you?
It's good. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying being back in full-time parish ministry, which is good. It's nice to have a school again and all the life that's kind of a part of that. I've also only been there for 3 months, so I don't know enough to know much different.
Is that
So-
it? It's only been 3 months?
Yeah.
Where were you, pastor, before you were at the Catholic Center forever?
Our Lady of Perpetual Help in New Albany.
Okay.
So I was there 6 years between being vocation director and vicar for clergy.
Okay, got it.
So
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the natives haven't run you out yet.
no,
I haven't
They have
seen
not.
any pitchforks or
no.
no priest being burned in effigy.
No.
So I think-
There's
I
been
think
no
things are
violence
good.
that I've
Yeah.
noticed. There may be parking lot conversations that could always be going on. But I actually went to junior high there.
Did you really?
It is. So it's kind of an interesting return
Has
to
it
the
changed?
south side.
Been a lion for life.
Pretty much. Early years, no. But after that, yeah.
Great.
So it was good. Has it changed? They just did some new construction before I came, and that's outstanding.
It's always nice to get that taken care of before
That's
you
right.
show up, isn't it?
That is. I have really nothing to do with that, so it's great. The current church was built while I was in college. Outside of paint and some carpet, the school has not changed really, hardly at all.
It is something just beautiful and fun about old Catholic schools. I still can walk into the hallways of my grade school, and I think sometimes just you close your eyes and like take a deep breath, and
Yeah.
it just takes you back. It just smells the same. It looks. Scott and I were on a call with somebody in a Catholic center out on the East Coast the other day, and the camera came up, and Scott was like, it looks like every Catholic center I've ever seen. That's like every chancery office that I've ever seen in my life.
Checks.
They
yeah.
look smaller though when you get bigger.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it seemed to be bigger when I was
the
little.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's jam-packed these days.
It is.
I will say, you were just talking about the new construction. My daughter, Charlotte, is an 8th grader at St. Mark's. She ran into Father Tim the other day and saw him, and he asked her how things were going. And she was like, "Oh, it's so great. Father Eric's so great. And he's so much." And Charlotte knows Father Tim, so she decided to give him a hard time. And she said, he comes by our volleyball practices and games all the time. And he says, "Oh, does he do that in that gym I built you?"
You gotta hold on to what you can, I guess.
Yeah, it was
It's
funny.
good.
So, no, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We appreciate you being here.
You bet.
I know I was giving you a hard time about the years of, but you've
It-
had a
it-
busy.
it has taken
you had
a
some
while.
busy time, but
Yeah.
I appreciate that. This played out much like my wife wanted to get a dog, and in late 2019 we had a serious conversation about like we're too busy. We don't have time to train a dog. We don't have time to we just don't have the time to put into this, and it's gonna not go well.
Then you got a dog.
And she like settled in and was like, "Oh, okay." And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden my excuse of we don't have time to do things gone. And we were probably 2 weeks in, and she just goes, "So, what do you think about getting a dog?" This is much like that. As soon as Father Eric got settled in as pastor, I emailed him and said, "Remember when you used to be too busy when you were downtown?"
Yes. Yes. It came pretty quick.
Yeah.
You were on it pretty quick.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I had filed that one away for the day you weren't vicar for clergy. So-
Gotcha.
And there's nothing as easy going as being a pastor of a massive parish. So,
Yeah, nothing to do there.
all right, ready for the 2-minute drill?
I am.
Great.
Are you?
Sure.
This is the time, as a new guest of the podcast, this is the time where you decide if I have any heresies that I proclaim,
Okay.
and let me know if I'm wrong.
All right.
But
Heresy tracker,
yes, I've been on a hot streak, but we'll see.
but undetermined if there's actually no heresy or if people are just
People have just stopped listening. Yeah, that's the other. Yeah, people are like, "Oh yeah, he did great," and I'm like, "Well, you didn't listen to a word I said." All right, 28th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Our first reading comes from Isaiah. So Isaiah is describing the suffering servant to us.
And just to let you know, it's the 29th Sunday in
It
Ordinary
is the
Time.
29th Sunday in Ordinary. That's a good start. We usually save the corrections for after.
Gotcha.
But thank you.
Just
gonna
thought I'd throw that in right away.
That's good. That's good. Third word. It's the 29th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Our first reading comes from Isaiah chapter 53. So Isaiah, again, is talking about the suffering servant, how he's chosen by God to bear the inequities of others, and that it's the Lord's will to crush him with suffering and make his life an offering for sin. But despite his suffering, the servant's going to see the light. He'll be satisfied. And through the suffering, he'll bring justification to many people by bearing their sins. His sacrifice brings righteousness to others, and that obedience fulfills God's purpose. So we obviously get some nice allusion there. Our responsorial psalm, Lord, let your mercy be on us as we place our trust in you. What do you think, Scott?
I mean, definitely not a banger.
Yeah, but I mean, I recognize it. It's for sure not a banger. Like we categorize our responsorial psalms here into 3 categories. They're a banger. Just we can't wait to hear the cantors just rip on this one. Meh, solid, but nothing to write home about, and a mumbler, which means it's so long that nobody in the congregation by the 3rd time through can remember what the words are, and everyone's just kind of humming along.
Gotcha.
So, anyway, I'd put this as meh.
Okay.
There's a good cadence to it. I think people will remember it, but there will for sure be some like the word grace will get worked in here by somebody at some point, right? Because they'll get confused. And
Set a place.
yeah, they'll just, or mercy, Lord, let your grace but mercy be on, and it'll be somebody who sings just a little too loud. It'll be great. Our second reading then comes from Paul's letter to the Hebrews. So Paul's encouraging believers to hold fast to their faith, reminding them that they have a great high priest in Jesus who ascended into heaven, and that he, as the Son of God, sympathizes with the human weaknesses because he was tempted as well in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. And believers are urged to approach God's throne of grace with confidence, knowing that they'll receive mercy at their time of need. And then our gospel reading. Our gospel comes from Mark chapter 10. Father, are we going to go long form or short form?
Long form.
Long form. Always. Not always. Is it always long form?
Generally.
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 If there's a reason, to not do the long form. Then
Last week we were discussing how that answer, the one consistent part of that answer when we ask priests is usually the word always. They say always long form or always short form. But Father, this is why we love you, Father.
the presumption goes with the long form.
Got it.
But there may be a reason to do the short
With just
form.
cause, it could be.
Yes.
Yeah, like short form if you lose your voice.
Right. Except I still did the long form. I had a deacon. I didn't have to.
There you go. All right. Short form. So, no, long form. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, what do you want to do for us?" Or, what do you want? Oh, man. "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." He replied, "What do you wish me to do for you?" They answered him, "Grant that in thy glory, your glory, we may sit at one to your right and the other to your left." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" They said to him, "We can." Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right or at my left is not mine to give you, but is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at James and John. Jesus summoned them, the 12, and said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make the authority over them felt. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
All right.
That was maybe one of my worst gospel readings I've ever done. But I was struggling there.
It's okay.
Sorry.
Other than Jeff struggling through the gospel, which he mentioned himself, not that I called him on it. Did Jeff get anything wrong, Father Eric Johnson?
I didn't catch anything, but I don't know that I was. I was just reading along. So there you go.
But I was laughing when we came in. We have these books every Sacred Sunday that we use to go through the readings. Father, what's your book called? What's the
This
title
is
of that
just
book?
it's called
The
Word
Word
of
of
the Lord.
God.
It's just Sunday. It's just the Sunday readings. So
Yeah. I just thought it was funny that I was like, "Oh, I wonder what that book's called." It's Word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be God.
there it is.
Well, what are you preaching on this weekend, Father?
Well, see, the funny thing is I don't have to preach this weekend. It's a deacon weekend, so
It's also pretty consistent.
when I said yes, I said
That's another one that
every
happens.
pastor that has a
I was like,
deacon.
when I said yes, it's like, well, I kind of picked the wrong week to do that, but that's all right. When I did step back to kind of look at these readings, when I was coming here, I think we have some interesting
knowing
readings.
Knowing I was coming. I thought you said when I was coming here. Like you're driving over.
No, I
glancing at
wasn't
the
driving.
readings real fast.
Our first reading from Isaiah comes from the servant songs of Isaiah, and we generally associate that with Holy Week and with the Triduum. We will hear these being spoken of as the suffering servant enters into the experience of sacrifice. And so for it to come up at this point in the year, I think is kind of an interesting thing, because behind this we have the notion of him being crushed. He will die in this, but also that death is sacrificial in the sense that it will bring about redemption of other people, the healing and forgiveness of sins, and the justification of the many. And that points to, I think, ultimately what our gospel reading, the first reading is chosen in light of the gospel. And so we can kind of see where the lectionary is seeing the gospel reading as it fits in. And the shorter version kind of points to that too, because that's the piece there.
It could have.
And I really do think the first reading is chosen because of the last line of the gospel. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And that really is kind of fundamentally the message of our gospel. And so I think one way is to sit there and reflect on just what it is that God has done. And that God does that in a manner in which he pours himself out. And so the instruction that he gives before to the disciples speaks of power and speaks of how we understand leadership as the world sees it, which involves the use of force, which involves power, and that is not the way that our God has chosen to come into the world, who comes into the world rather in an experience of service and self-giving, self-sacrifice. And he calls the disciples to do the same. It will not be like that among you. Whoever wants to be the greatest among you must be the servant. And so it calls them back to that experience of service and self-giving. I think you can also, as I sat with it a little bit, I think you can also see that in the first part of the reading, in which you have James and John, the sons of Zebedee, asking Jesus if they can sit at his right and his left, and they want to appear in glory. It's not the most tactful thing. In fact, when this happens in the Synoptic Gospels, it's their mother that comes and asks Jesus this question. It's not the two of them. Jesus literally is just predicted for the third time his passion, so he's talking about his own death, and then they come up and say, well, we want to be at your right and your left when you come into your glory.
I mean, they were also known as the Sons of Thunder, so
yes.
I don't know that.
Yeah.
Carefully choosing words is really, they're like, more
right.
force
It's
in
just,
their actions, yeah.
let's just get right to the chase. And the other disciples were upset probably because they wished that they had been the ones that had made that request.
Like, no, I want to sit there.
And but what strikes me about that is Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking for. Can you be baptized with the baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? Can you drink the cup that I am going to drink, that's a Eucharistic, sacramental between baptism and Eucharist that stands before us, but can you do that? And they say yes.
Yeah, I was going to say the best part is that they, not having a clue what he's talking about, they're like, yeah, sure.
Totally.
Yes. And
That's it? Great. Which
so-
is funny coming off of last week's gospel.
Yeah.
The rich man being like, I
Yeah.
do all those things.
Let's do those
Great.
things. They say that, and he says, well, you will. It's going to happen. And I think the piece where that fits in there too is it will. The day will come. They don't understand anything at this point, but the day will come when they will lay down their lives in service to others. James, right at the beginning, will become a martyr for and imitate Christ in laying down his life in the service of others, in striving to redeem, to bring the message of Christ's redemption to the world. And so I think, that also kind of calls us to reflect a little bit on, I may not understand now. I may still struggle with the sense of being of service, quite literally seeking the good of the other person and not my own, being present to attend to whatever it is that they need. But following Christ means ultimately coming to a place of understanding and a place where more and more of myself is given until my life hopefully is a gift to other people. So that's kind of what I was sitting with as I first kind of looked over those readings. So
Yeah, I got nothing.
This is why I wanted this guy here. I found myself when I was reading these readings thinking, like, again, this is my dumb brain, but just thinking about Isaiah preaching this idea and how many people were hearing this thinking like, wait, does this have to be me? Like, to think that that's in the Old Testament, nobody has a clue. Like, they're still trying to wrap their heads around this suffering servant and like this Savior who comes, and they're saying though that a person is going to have to just wear all of the sin and all of these punishments, and that they will do that, right? And like crush him in infirmity, right? And I don't know, I just found myself thinking like it's not incredibly uplifting, but I wonder how much in the Old Testament, like how often do you think, or I don't know. This is just ramblings for me, so I have no idea how it applies, but I just sit there and think like, was there enough recognition of what the Old Testament prophets had shared that there would be somebody who like this clicks with, who they're hearing Jesus preach about these things, like his followers and these people, that they're hearing this and thinking, wait, is this the suffering servant? Is this the man who has come to save us?
Right. I have to say, I don't know how much kind of theological reflection the people that heard and then treasured Isaiah's prophecy. On some level, the suffering servant for Isaiah, I do think, is the people. Mm-hmm. It's Israel itself who has been broken and suffered in exile. But how they understood that reaching its ultimate fulfillment, for Isaiah, the people of Israel have a particular vocation that is kind of a new thing coming out of the exile, a new thing that points to Israel as having a mission of drawing all other nations to the Lord. And of course, Jesus himself then embodies that as Israel reaches out in a universal way to all people and calls them to find salvation, Jew and Greek, Gentile, that whole experience of everyone, that God's love overflows to all nations and utilizes the faith of a people that have been waiting so long for that promise to be fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's part of it too. I think the other thing that we hear in the servant songs is that nobody recognizes the suffering servant as anyone special. There's nothing, nobody looks upon him and sees him as comely in appearance or anything that would attract others. There's nothing special that people discern, and yet he does something that redeems them. That even though other people don't recognize him and don't recognize just what it is that he does, even though he becomes the object of hatred and brutality, nevertheless, what he is doing is he's doing that for the very people who don't recognize him, who don't see him, and will restore relationship with God through his sacrifice. And so how people saw that in terms of individual, I'm not entirely sure. But we do believe that, the church can't read any of this without calling to mind Christ. All of Scripture we read in light of our faith in Jesus Christ. And so that becomes a very potent, very powerful image for us in understanding not only what it is that God does, but how God chose to come into a space, not because of something we earned or anything that we did that was particularly special or something that we even recognized, but he came precisely to us when we were broken, when we were estranged, when we were sinful. And that is where his grace serves us, surprises us, and restores us.
And still does.
Right.
I think I was struck there as you were talking about, like, it's impossible to not be experiencing these things and recognize Jesus, but like we, on an everyday basis, I think I find myself struggling with and when I fall and when I struggle, there's a lack of recognition that like these actions that I'm taking, these sinful actions that I'm taking, these things that I'm doing are still being worn by Christ. Mm-hmm. That these are sins that I'm still placing on a burden on him without that recognition and without, the acknowledgement that that's there. So I don't know. I think that's what struck me so much about that first reading is thinking to like, man, we know this to be true. We know this to be the case. This has been an echo on this podcast, like just it's the wonders of Scripture that no matter how many times we read this stuff and see this and talk about it, it still can hit us in different ways. This recognition and the wake up that's necessary there.
Yeah.
I think it can also make some sense of kind of our own sense of suffering. So in the stuff that we deal with on a regular basis, our own hurt, our own suffering, it's easy for us to turn inward and just kind of focus on ourselves. But our second reading calls us back to remember that our Lord, in becoming one like us, understands us. And in understanding us, is close to us. And so that somehow, even in our suffering, we can look back Not that everything comes out happy. It's not like that. Suffering is suffering, but somehow within that is still grace. And somehow in that, God's mystery is still present. And the call to kind of recognize that there's nothing in my experience, even my suffering, that somehow God isn't present to. And God doesn't love me in a particular way in the midst of it.
Last week we talked about the rich man and that you can't take many possessions to heaven. And we talked a little bit about, like, reflected on how Maximilian Kolbe said, I don't want to just be a saint, I want to be a great saint. And like striving for more, striving for greatness, striving for holiness. How does that fit into today's gospel? Because, like, if I want to sit at the right hand of Jesus when he in his time of glory, means that I also want to seek holiness and I want to be able to be in God's kingdom.
I think the seeking after holiness, first of all, is always concrete.
Mm-hmm.
When we say things like holy, even when we say the word love, that can seem so abstract as to what does that mean. But Jesus says in the gospel what that means, and that has to do with service of the self-gift. And that will come up again and again. In St. John's Gospel at the Last Supper, we don't have an account of the institution there of the Eucharist. Instead, we have the washing of the disciples' feet. Jesus goes around and washes the feet of all that are there, and then he says, do you understand what I've just done? You call me teacher and Lord, and so I am. I mean, he claims his authority in that. He says, but I, who is your teacher and Lord, if I wash your feet, then you ought to wash one another's feet. And that is, I think, stands as a reminder that if we want to strive after Jesus, then our first thoughts have to be oriented towards what is good, what is the good of the other. That's the essence of love. And that's not something that's just we can do in a general way. That does involve what is good for this person, what is love for this person in front of me right now, under the circumstances that I find myself in. And if we try to be faithful to that kind of thoughtfulness about the other, to move away from our self-centeredness, which is more concerned with how do I manipulate the other person to get me what it is that I want in this moment, and to try to create my own good, which I cannot do, which this past weekend was very much about. I don't have the power to bring about my salvation with what I have. But to be focused in on the other and the need of the other, the good of the other, to take that as my general orientation in life is to imitate the one who loved me first, who, though he was God himself, nevertheless, out of love for me, chose to lay himself down, empty himself, becoming the form of a slave, so that I might be restored to life with him and share somehow in the divinity of God. And so I think we really have to approach that in a very concrete way. So we'll say things like, spouses are there. Part of the vocation of spouses is to try to get the other person and children to heaven. And well, what does that mean? And I think trying to break down the sense of what that means, but we should be concerned for the salvation of others. What is their good? And sometimes that's a very concrete, tangible physical good, a need because of poverty or suffering. Sometimes that's a spiritual good of listening and looking deeply into why is that person here? And trying to put that question in front of us and not just move always down to ourselves. I think the real challenge in that is to try to be able to do that even when I hurt. Because when I hurt, everything goes to what hurts, right? You just focus in on your suffering. And so where do I still, even in my own suffering, find enough freedom to be able to touch the need of the other? And I think the only way that we can do that is through supernatural hope. It's that we hope, and we hope in what it is that Christ says and and are confident that what he says is true, so that my current suffering is not the last word. And if I have enough freedom from that, then I have the freedom to be able to love other people.
It's interesting you say that. I don't know if this translates in the same way or not, but so my wife and I lost our son almost 2 years ago. He lived for a few hours and he passed away, but going through grief together was what I consider to be like a very supernatural thing, because somehow or another, like, I was able to be strong when she needed to cry, and she was able to be strong when I needed to cry. And there's something about grace and matrimony and the sacraments and grace of what it needs to, that supernatural hope that you spoke about. I don't know if it's the same thing or not, but there is something really beautiful about being able to, even in your deepest hurt, look out beyond yourself and your own feelings and see the other.
I think there's something very profoundly true about that. And I think particularly when you consider that you suffered the same tragedy, but how you experience that is different. And yet somehow finding a commonality in that, in a manner that allows you to be that way with each other. I had a friend of mine years and years ago, when he was reflecting on his marriage, he said to me, he says, Eric, it's not 50-50. He said that it's never 50-50. It's like some days it's 70-30, some days it's, 20-80. Sometimes I have something to give and she doesn't.
Yep.
And sometimes it's the other way around. The important thing is that we keep coming back to the table.
Yep.
And I think that awareness that even in your own loss of, in what hurts, that nevertheless there's also a sense of love of the good of the other that not only steps into that hurt, but somehow finds the answers to your own thing as well in the midst of that commonality. You can't create that on your own. We need relationship, whether that's in marriage or anywhere else. We need that kind of dialogue in our suffering to not only make sense of ourselves, but to recognize God's presence even as I try to bring that presence to bear on another. And so, yes, I think that's very true. Even if that's not something you thought about.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the grace, I'd say both of the sacrament that you receive as well as the grace of just God in that moment is of somehow recognizing the need of the other, and perhaps even in the midst of that loss, recognizing God's presence in that. Even if there's a part of you that just can't wrap yourself around it.
I do think it's a beautiful gift that we're given in the sacrament of marriage. That, to your example, Father, like whatever the breakdown is, there's 100% there, right? Like there's a recognition, they're seeing it. You even hear couples talk about like being like, it's an openness to say, I've got nothing today. Like I've got nothing to give. I need your help here. I'm not feeling well. I've had a bad day. And there's always in that recognition, of how the other person can kind of pick up the pieces there to help you out. I think whether it's 70-30 or 80-20 or 90-10, or 50-50, there's still 100% of you there. And I think that's where it's a different conversation for a different podcast, but where marriages tend to start to break down is when
2020.
Yeah. When there's not the willingness to step that up, or the recognition of and the prayerfulness to say, Lord, I need you. I need your grace tonight because I got to do this, and I'm not feeling it, but I got to, because that's what she needs. That's what he needs. That's what my spouse needs. So, yeah.
All right.
You're pretty good at this.
Yeah.
For first time. Just saying.
Well, thank you.
Good times.
Yeah.
All right. Should we move on to dumb questions?
Yeah, let's
Line it
derail
up
this
a bit,
bad
yeah?
boy real
Okay.
fast here.
Back on track.
All right. You listened to 1.5 episodes, so you heard one round of dumb questions.
Yes.
You could have listened to the second half of an episode.
It was the first.
Oh, never mind.
So
You're
yes,
right.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, he only listened to half of Father Christian's episode. He probably couldn't handle the banter. And yeah, you heard me, Father. Well, you probably didn't because you know we're at banter now. So Father Christian doesn't like the banter before and after.
Gotcha.
All right. You were talking about you were just sharing with us that this weekend you had lost your voice. You had mass, you get up there, the deacons preach the gospel. Is there a scenario where like you just turn to the deacons and you're like, I ain't got it. I need you to preach this weekend. You just like is there a scenario where you can just ask them like not just your deacons, I'm saying in general. I won't put your deacons on the spot here.
I have done that when I was able to give the person enough time.
Okay.
I
Not
would
like on the altar?
I would never lean over and say, "Hey, if you got something." At that point, the people of God are better off if we just sit in silence for a few moments and allow the word to speak on its own rather than one of us trying to stumble through something that we haven't thought about at all.
That is, I would love to visually watch
Yeah.
just a mass where you lean over when it's time for the gospel and or the homily and just say, "Hey, you got anything?
Is this my
Yeah.
week, your week?
Is this
Yeah.
is this not your week?" That'd actually be really funny to watch.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that does happen. I mean, I've not encountered that, but I do know guys
heard
where
those
there was
stories.
confusion as to who had the homily, and neither of them had prepared for it. So how they dealt with it, I'm not entirely sure. If I were in those shoes and I had something that had resonated with me, I might say something briefly about it, but it would not be the full. I just would not inflict that on the people of God. They don't deserve it. Something. The pulpit doesn't belong to me. So there needs to be some prayerfulness that's there. I definitely wouldn't throw that at one of my deacons for. Now, like I said, if there's some time to pray, and I have done that. I had a situation, a family emergency that rose up on Good Friday several years ago, and I called my deacon on Holy Thursday and said, I have to leave. And are you able to step into that homily? And he said yes. And so, but again,
How do you do?
I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I wouldn't
know.
answer that question
I know you
anyway.
wouldn't.
Can a deacon preside at a Good Friday service?
He could for parts of it, but he preached it. I had another priest step in. I
But
don't
would you need
remember
to?
exactly I don't think so. I mean, it's not Mass, although it presumes that a priest in Mass vestments. It's the only time that the priest wears a chasuble and doesn't celebrate Mass. The chasuble is reserved for that, but on Good Friday, the priest dresses in chasuble. So I don't have a real good answer for that, but I would say yes. The deacon could preside at that if there's no priest available.
That's a good one. Next question that I've immediately come up with. Have I been pronouncing chasuble wrong my whole life?
How have you been pronouncing it?
Chasuble. But you were saying chasuble?
Chasuble? Chasuble? Sounds good to me.
All right. I was just like, there's a decent chance I've just said this wrong forever. Maybe I have. All right. You are a wandering homilist.
Yes.
Tell me about that. When did, like Father Eric said, like,
Like he goes. to
I've
different
never seen,
parishes
I don't think I've ever seen you preach behind an ambo. Me personally. I'm not
Right.
saying you never have.
Well, it
but-
didn't belong to him.
Well, I mean,
Got him.
I said, well, you go all the way back. I mean, I
met
met you in my
for
first
a long
year of
time.
priesthood.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I
met you when you were a
first got
seminarian.
ordained, I preached from a text,
Okay.
and
Which is probably good practice for right off the
it was
bat,
good.
yeah.
It was important for me at that time. But in my experience, when I preach from a text, the homily starts to get dense. I'm focused on the language and how I'm saying it enough that it just gets kind of dense. And partially because it's not my natural way of communicating. So that doesn't mean it's not off the cuff. I generally have a series of movements or an outline or something like that that's in my head. And if you come to multiple masses, it won't be word for word, but it'll follow that. It's also not a memorized text. I mean, I have to have the freedom to kind of speak. And there are still occasions when I want to be very focused on what I say and how I say it, that I will function from a text, but it's pretty rare. The last time I did that, my uncle was Monsignor Paul Cutter, and I did it for his funeral. And part of that was because of my own grief in that and standing in that, but also there was some things I was very particular about what it was that I wanted to say. Now, having said that, that's me.
Yeah.
Some guys that would just not work.
No,
and
absolutely.
And so I think guys need to preach as they are most effective. I mean, they have to be honest with themselves. And I've heard some outstanding homilies that are text-based, and it's interesting too as a priest. When I hear other people preach, which is almost always deacons, I rarely hear other priests do that, but I'm always sitting behind them. And so I don't see it. I mostly hear it. And it's been interesting to approach a homily more from what I hear than watching the facial expressions or stuff along those lines.
It's interesting you say that, because I think something that has always struck me about the way you preach is that, and please take this for it is a compliment, not me taking a pot shot, but like there is a performance to how you preach in a very good way. Like your body movements, the way you move back and forth in front of the altar, like the way you tilt your head, the way you move your hands helps make points. Like I watch, like I think I watch, sometimes I even, when you're preaching, watch the crowd, and like you just do a very good job of like holding attention and people moving with the message that you're saying and how it's being delivered. I don't know. I'm always struck by it. So it's interesting that you say that you're used to hearing the homily from behind and not seeing
It's
those
a different
pieces because
experience. That brings something, because I don't know that I intend it to be that way.
Oh, I'm sure.
But what I'm saying is, no, I heard it is, but I guess what I would say is that's my more natural way of relating. Is talking to the congregation. For me, the text would be a bit of a barrier. And part of the walking is I think it keeps my brain going. I don't wander everywhere, but to just stand, I tend to move a little bit. But part of that is that for me as a communicator, that's kind of how that naturally starts to develop. I do think when I preach from a text, it is different. I think you can hear the difference. And I think part of that is because the text becomes to some degree more important. There's something that I'm interpreting as I'm reading it rather than how I'm saying it.
Yeah.
So, but it's funny, when I was early, I was scared to death to be in front of people. In fact, my first homiletics class, after I got done with my very first little homily for that, one of my classmates said, "Eric, don't be nervous," because I was trembling. And one of my other classmates spun around and said, "That has to be the worst advice I think I've ever heard." But it took me a long time. It's funny to think about that, but now I talk in front of people every day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all the time. And I feel very comfortable in that. I enjoy it.
In my mind, I had decided that, I mean, knowing that you're a musician and you play guitar, I think this is just you living out like the performer in you. Like you just missed your calling as like lead guitarist, and where you could just move to this is the equivalent of you just moving to the corner of the stage and putting, one leg up on an amplifier and just really just ripping a solo. I think that's what's happening.
Right. I don't think anybody really would want to see that.
I would. 100% I would. No, that's great. All right.
Who did you look up to as good preachers when you were before you became a seminarian and when you were a seminarian?
That's a good question. I was pretty blessed with good priests growing up. I mean, my uncle certainly was I listened to him preach a fair amount in that, and he was a mentor to me in a lot of ways, and I think he was a very good homilist. Trying to think if there's, they were very different homilists. Father Joe McNally was my pastor at St. Barnabas when I entered into seminary, and his was all, he was complete, kind of lived out of his experience of emotion, and it was he was a feeler, and so all of his homilies kind of were rooted in some stuff like that and things. But rather than just point to one person and say this is what it was, I think one of the nice things of being at seminary is you're surrounded by a number of priests, and you're encountering a whole variety of homiletic styles, all of which can have their good and their place. And there's some guys that, when they open their mouths, you're generally like, it touches something that kind of resonates with you. But then in certain circumstances, they might struggle with that. And yet somebody else kind of comes to the fore in that. And I don't think there's any one path. And so I've never been one that's like, that's how I want to preach.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of things in homilies where I've said, I'll tuck that one away. That's worthwhile holding on to and spending time with. Even if I use that differently. But I think that I've been fortunate to hear a lot of different priests preach, a lot of deacons preach, and I think the gift that's been in that is that there's not always one path. And I may preach a certain way most of the time, but every now and then I'll come at something completely different because I've seen that or witnessed that in another. That doesn't really answer your question, but I don't know that I have. This is the one.
Yeah.
So we're in the world of like your movement and your do you remember the moment when you decided to like step out from behind?
I first started preaching away from the Ambo at Bishop Chittard.
Okay.
So when I was first ordained, I was assigned to St. Pius X as the associate, and I was the chaplain of Bishop Chittard.
Did you meet any cool people while you were there?
I met a few cool people. I met somebody that helped out with senior retreats.
Yeah, I knew a guy.
Yeah, that guy. I had to work on him a little bit, but it was okay.
Still working.
But no, it was. That's where I started it. Yes, Jeff. That's where I first stepped out, but pretty quickly, and I will say I was pretty nervous when it first happened, but pretty quickly I fell into that at St. Pius as well. But my first whole year, it was all from a text. And so it just, but that was good. That helped me it helped me read scripture. You can do homiletics in seminary. I think that's important. That formation is there. But until you are preaching every single day and you're reading scripture every single day, and that's a part of it, is kind of you start to read differently. And you start to pray with it differently. And that informs how you end up preaching as well. So
that's great. All right. I have a long list, but
Cut it there for today.
Yeah, I think so.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Father, thank you so much.
You have to come back, though, because I have more questions.
Yeah, please come back.
This is great. Thank you, Father. We appreciate it.
Peace.
Bye, everyone.
It's all It's alright, cause I'm all set for. It's alright, cause I'm all set for Sunday.